Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Joanne Davis, authority on client agency relationships and founder of Joanne Davis Consulting. Joanne, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. And now, with a new book coming out, it's even more of a pleasure because books are important. They change people. They're wonderful. And welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. And Deb, I feel the same way about you. It's always a pleasure to collaborate with you on anything because you are Ms. Internationalist.
Well, aren't you? You're so kind. Thank goodness I've got like a global background today instead of like my office. Okay, well, let's focus on you now. And look, let's start at the beginning. Okay, tell us the idea behind your new book.
Well, for years, I've been teaching clients that if the problem is at home, going to a new agency is not going to solve the problem. And I tell clients repeatedly, you get the agency and the agency work product that you deserve. You are co-producers. You don't win the Kentucky Derby without a great horse and a great jockey. You are together in the saddle together to make success. And so from years of sharing this, there's still a lot of marketers and procurement managers who don't understand.
Oh, you raise a point. I'm very curious though. You've been doing this a long time, and why focus right now on client agency issues, particularly regarding the very clever thing that you say between good and bad client behaviors? I mean, do you feel that the industry is at some kind of an inflection point on these issues? I mean, we've been through COVID, there's new ways of working, there's fractional ad roles. God knows AI is changing things. There's even people who suggest that the agency business doesn't even create ads anymore. I mean, why now?
The pandemic started it because we were forced to deal with lack of control. And so that caused fear and depression. And with a boomeranging stock market, although the stock market's been doing very well the last few days, with uncertainty about wars, uncertainty about presidential elections, there is concern. There's concern on the part of marketers about how can I do more, better, faster, quicker, more successful. And the pressures coming from Wall Street, the pressures coming from their stakeholders, everybody in the world in marketing seems to be worried about Amazon moving into financial services and prescription drugs. Pressure, pressure, pressure. And so the confluence has come together where the agency world has to change because of the client pressures and the changes that the clients feel they're facing.
It's interesting because your title is How to Get Your Agency to Run Through Brick Walls Without Paying More, which is such a wonderful title. And I love the brick wall behind you. I just hope no one's going to be jumping through it anytime soon, like on your cover. But your book essentially helps marketers become better clients to their agencies. You talk about the horse and the jockey. There are very few books that focus on this. Why aren't clients coached to work effectively with their agencies? I mean, when you think of all the money that goes into producing advertising, you'd think companies would train their people in agency management.
I think they take shortcuts. There's assumptive behavior that how can the so-called soft skills be so hard? It should be common sense to be able to teach your agency if you are teaching your people. But sadly, most don't know how to do it. Yes, there'll be some in and out sessions. We've done over the years sessions, but it's a day, right? Or it's a half-day module in a 3-day conference. And it's just not enough. It's like any craft, you get better at the craft the more you practice it. So that was part of the motivation for the book, Deb.
No, I can certainly see that. And I think we should talk a little bit just about the format. I alluded to the good client behavior and the bad client behavior. One of the things that I love is you go through a little bit of a dialogue and you talk about how the agency is thinking something, responds in a certain way, and wishes they said something else. And it's such wonderful human nature. Do you want to talk about the inspiration for that? I just love that part.
Yeah, I'd love to do that too, because I believe I love what I do for a living. And if you love what you do for a living, you want to share that love, right? And the fact of the matter is, we're all taught to be polite. Marketers are taught to be polite. And so they'll say something to an agency, such as, develop a campaign that'll help us sell more products. And the agency's like, of course, that's what we're here for. But can you quantify what your goals are? Are we moving from X units to Y units? Are we trying to change market share? Who's the bullseye target audience? I mean, there's one of my favorite little anecdotes. I have so many in the book. Is the target audience is older men. So what's the profile? Is it Joe Biden or Mick Jagger? They're both 80 plus years old, enormously successful, enormously famous, enormously wealthy. So who's the profile we want? Oh, we want more Mick Jaggers. And no disrespect to President Biden, fewer President Bidens. So it's the agency will say, tell us who you want us to reach. The client says, it's your job. You're the agency. That's what we hired you. And the agency's thinking, Mamma mia, if they don't know what they want, we can't read their minds.
No, you make a great point. And of course, if there's 20-year-olds in the room, older men could be 40. So you know,
Exactly right.
there's
Exactly.
a lot of things. Well, you must have a favorite part of the book, or at least a section that you feel is really most useful to readers. Is it the whole thread of what we just discussed, what the agency thinks, what the client says, and so on, or is it something else?
That's one part of it. I'm like a mother who loves all her children. I love all the stories we tell in the book. I love that a number of marketing clients and strategic sourcing clients I've supported over the years were kind enough to contribute quotes. So we have a quote in each chapter and several quotes at the start of the book that sum up in a couple of sentences and sound bites sage advice from some wonderful, wonderful people. I love that. I love that we're visually showing some Tom Fishburne cartoons because he does an amazing job of gently poking fun at our industry with a great chuckle. I love that we've designed the book, thanks to you, to look a little bit like Excel for Dummies, where we show a smiley face for good client behavior and a frowny face for bad client behavior. And I think one of the things I love best is that it's short. Because every colleague, and Deb, this probably happens with you too, based on the business you're in, says people write business books. They write business books about leadership. They write books about how to build an ad agency, how to build your internal agency. There's not a lot on this subject, a handful of us. But you start reading it and you read the first chapter, maybe you read the second chapter, and then it's like hundreds of pages and you get bored and you don't read it. I intentionally love that this is short and to the point because the industry is time-starved.
No, you're right. You're right. It's kind of like the simple brevity concept. And I'm so glad you mentioned Tom Fishburne because I also thought that your advice in many ways was presented almost the way he does his cartoons, to the point sometimes poking some fun gently, but also getting to the seriousness of how do we do it better. And I think that's critical. Look, the title assumes that marketers are the target for the book, but what can an agency executive or even a team, a collaborative team, learn from reading your advice?
They can put themselves in the other guy's shoes. And by putting yourself in the other guy's shoes, it makes you better able to ask questions and facilitate conversations. And if you see, as an agency leader reading this, good behavior examples, you want to celebrate that with your people and make sure your people are embodying that great behavior too. If you see bad behaviors, you want to work with your people to give them skills and teach them how to facilitate a client that might be the bad client and how to improve. And of course, if you have millennials and Gen Z type staff members, they use a different language. So we have a glossary at the end with the language to understand what they mean when they say this is dope, which means good.
That was very clever. That was clever. And you also put what clients say, what clients mean when they say things like, let me think about that a little bit, and it really means like the thought bubbles like, oh God, how do I tell them I hate it? Well, it's also human nature in the way that we communicate. But you focus a lot on creative agencies. Tell us about the relevance of the book for media agency relationships, for example.
It's so interesting because a lot of media agencies say to me, why do you call the general agency the creative agency and call us the media agency? We're creative too. And you know what? A lot of them are absolutely right. I see great creativity and imagination coming from media agencies. But as much as Gen Zers use words like dope, I'm still using old-fashioned words like creative and media. So should it be content and media? Maybe, but everybody has a vein of creativity in them. But the lessons are applicable. In fact, I shared an early draft with a friend of mine who's in a different type of service industry. And she said, you should have made this book broader because it's applicable to all service industries, not just creative ad agencies. I'm like, no, then it would have been longer than 100 pages. We didn't want to do that. But that analogy is apt for media agencies. The lessons are universal lessons.
Yeah, and look, you also want to focus on what you've been doing, spending your whole career doing. And even though it is applicable, let other people apply the lessons. That's kind of my thought. Not that I want to go through each individual category, but certainly procurement is far more involved now than they ever were in a lot of agency choices. What do they take from this? Because you're not really addressing them directly. You're always talking about, the client and agency, what they're thinking. What does procurement take from it?
Procurement has gotten so great lately over the last few years, and great compliments to the ANA for having procurement training and establishing mentor programs. I mean, I'm just so happy that the light bulb's gone off and the language of vendor has gotten reduced. I mean, yes, there's still some vendor language, but vendor makes me think of a hot dog vendor, right? Not a professional service provider who can come up with a concept that can change the course of your business. I mean, it's different. It's UN week in New York now, and I'm reminded of one of my marketing buddies who his company had a policy that they could only spend a certain amount of dollars on a hotel, and he had to go to New York to meet with agencies. My buddy had to stay at a 2-star hotel because it fit the price scale that his company allowed. It was UN week. He was mugged. His laptop was stolen. So wasn't that penny wise and pound foolish? So the difference between a higher end service provider versus a lower end pricing exercise. I mean, I'm so gratified. So procurement can be reminded of some of these realities by reading the book. But I'm pleasantly surprised, as I touched on a moment ago, that more and more procurement people are becoming enlightened. I mean, we're working with a potential client right now, and I said, "What's your budget?" And he said, "I'm not giving you a budget. We respect you and your expertise. We want you to build the work plan and tell us what it should cost to do the work properly." So that's a big step forward. So we need more of those guys and fewer of the guys, oh, so 10 years ago who didn't get it.
Well, we're on that subject, and particularly a subject of money, which is always critical in these issues. You do have a chapter on money and payment terms. Are money issues now somehow getting more challenging? I mean, you mentioned about the positive elements of procurement, and I'm not suggesting that there's negative when it comes to money, but so, you do hear a lot of things about some people are not being paid for over 90 days. I know that there's been initiatives to cut that down and so on. Are money issues more challenging?
Money issues have always been challenging, right? They're just different flavors of issues. I mean, there's the point of view that says, I can get the cheapest, or give me, I don't need the most expensive people working on it. But think about it. Someone who's been doing it for a longer period of time can probably do it 2 or 3 times as fast and has the potential to get it right the first time. So think about it from that perspective.
No, you're right. And it leads me to something else. And I also want to bring up a little bit of current research, but one of your hallmark phrases and industry sessions is, "Can this marriage be saved?" And I think in many ways there's certainly a creative issue to that, but also a money issue as we continue on that theme. But I there were also some very stark findings in a recent survey that the ANA and the 4As did, called Cost of the Pitch. And I believe their research showed that if a typical pitch has 3 agencies as finalists, the average, and I'm reading this now from the summary, the average total cost of a review is about $1.2 million when an incumbent agency is involved. I mean, I could go on, but it speaks again to, can this marriage be saved, and many of these issues. So talk about what that means in terms of today's environment.
Well, we have to try harder. I mean, one of the first things I say to a client when they call and say, "Can you help me with a review?" is, "Can you save the marriage?" And there was one guy I spoke with a year ago-ish, September, a year or so ago. And he called and he said, "Hi, my name's Tom. Bob speaks real highly of you. Can you help me with an agency review?" I said that in 30 seconds. And I said, "Well, what's the issue?" And he said, "Well," I said, "Do you like the creative?" "Yeah, the creative's good." "Do you like the thinking?" "Yeah, the thinking's good." "Do you like the team?" "Well, I used to like the team." "So what happened?" So the head account person's husband got a job and she moved to Paris, and the successor account person he didn't like as much. And I said, "Did you tell the agency CEO?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, did you tell the agency CEO that Mr. X isn't clicking with you the same way Madam Y did?" And so we went through all these questions, and it turned out he never talked to the CEO. I said, "Here's his email. I know him. He's a really good guy. Contact him. Tell him you want somebody who's more like Ms. Y than Mr. X, and report back." And he called me a month later and he said, "You saved me a great deal of money. You have integrity." So I was really happy about that, because he would have spent so much time and would have paid our fee. Not that our fee is enormous, but the soft costs that a client has to deal with and the other agencies spending money to compete would have been wasted. And it was just
Yeah.
really simple fix.
And the disruption and the starting over and the the pause, hit pause until the new, it's, yeah. And sometimes we think, in an era where, aspirin solves a headache, that you snap your fingers and something new will do the trick. No, I think I think that's admirable, but it also leads to something that does seem to be changing a little bit. At the end of August, Ad Age published a piece, and they did quote you, about how agency search consultants are evolving as marketers lead more reviews. Talk us through what was in that story, especially in the context of some of the lessons from your book.
Yeah, happy to. We've been doing marriage counseling for clients and agencies for quite some time. Now, we're known a little bit in the industry for doing reviews, because some of them, whether you want them to or not, end up in the advertising trade press. The marriage counseling stays way under the radar. But the fact of the matter is, because, and it goes back to the point about procurement, because procurement people are getting better at managing agency reviews, and there are so many tools to learn about agencies, the market share of consultants handling reviews is declining because clients are handling themselves. So if you're a consultant and that's been your primary source of business and you never did marriage counseling, you're going to start offering some new services. So I think that's part of what we are seeing in the industry.
So there are now less reviews than there were. What was it? There was several years ago, I guess maybe it was even before COVID, there was some kind of a word like, megapalooza, like review of palooza
Media
or something.
Media
Whatever, it was crazy. But so the number of reviews has gone down then, you're saying, the most
I'm not sure if the number of reviews have gone down, but the number of reviews being supported by a consultant.
I see. And because it seems that in some contracts, it's written in that people have to do some kind of a review.
They have to review every 4 years.
And it doesn't mean they get rid of their agency, but they have to look at,
that's right.
That's
right. Yeah, we have a number of clients that call us back every 4 or 5 years. It's like, Joanne, it's time. The contract says every 4 to 5 years we're having a review, so it's time, whether they like the current agency or not. It's a requirement.
You would think that there are benefits to longevity, and that you start to speak your own shorthand, and the longer you work with teams, even if there's new players on it, that you start. But things change, media changes, people want fresh ideas. You know what I mean? Culture changes. What do you do?
Yeah. What do the teachers try to teach us in second grade? Change is our friend.
You had a good teacher. That
was Mrs. McGuire. She was really great. After Sister Patricia Michael, who was kind of tough in grade 1.
It sounds like it. The name alone. The name alone. All right. So we started talking a little bit about some changes in the industry. What do you see ahead? Particularly, for this whole business of client agency relationships, particularly given, the acceleration of technologies, or is that not as big a factor as the human factor? I don't know.
The human factor should always be a factor. I mean, we've been doing some work with a client and they got a little bit sloppy during the pandemic by not meeting in person. And we said to them, when's the last time you met in person? And they said, last year. When's the last time you had dinner together? Oh, 2 years before the pandemic. So, if you know people, you build up trust and confidence and comfort, right? Because if you trust someone, you're going to not be embarrassed to say, I don't know how to crack this business problem. Agency, help me. because they can help you. So there's that soft stuff. But then from the non-soft stuff, AI is like Charles Dickens, the best of times, the worst of times. I mean, there are amazing things that it can do when used in the right hands and guided by the right AI prompt engineer. So the speed of technology is going faster and faster and faster, and it's going to continue. It just has to be harnessed so the power can be managed for the good.
Well, I love that you use that quote, the worst of times, the best of times, because it's from Great Expectations. And of course, that's what we're all kind of betting on, in terms of the AI game, but among other things. Well, let's just focus back to you. Writing a book is always a significant undertaking, even though you make light of the fact that it's short and that you loved it and so on, but it's always a significant undertaking. And I always find that we learn as much about ourselves when we do it as we do our subject matter. There is something pretty magical about the writing process. So what did you, if you don't mind sharing it with us, what did you take away from this experience?
I learned that it's harder than I thought it was going to be. And it took more time than I thought it was going to take. But I learned that by having a discipline and trying to allocate time each day or every few days on it, it became a calendar item. Otherwise,